Hello, hello. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write, where I give questionable writing advice through running metaphors. This is episode 26, which means I've accomplished my first major goal for this channel in that I've completed its first marathon. I want to thank every single one of you who has been with me through this entire series, or any newbies who joined along the way. I have learned so much about the Authortube and Booktube communities, primarily how little I actually knew at the start. To coincide with my self-inflicted goal, I'm going to detail today how to write those worthy endings. These are the stories that were bittersweet to finish, and were so emotionally powerful that I had to close the book when I was done and reconsider my life for a few minutes. There are many books which have become immortalized for me thanks to their fantastic endings. There are others which I hate due to their disappointing final moments. Worse yet are overall good books which become forgettable when their endings fail to excite my imagination. If you can keep readers engaged through the end of your story, the most likely thing they'll take away is the ending itself, or some pivotal moment near the climax. There may be flashy moments sprinkled throughout the story to capture their fancy, but their lasting impressions should come from the story's conclusion, or the moment they decide to DNF the novel, but since I'm aiming for a positive outlook today, I'm not diving into that one. Much like how you don't want your body to give out 20 feet from the finish line, or to raise your hands up to cheer of getting first place, only to be passed at the last possible moment, you want your story's endings to carry all the way through. This means their themes come together clearly in the end, the main conflict introduced in the novel gets resolved in a satisfactory manner, and any important plot threads are not left dangling. That last one is optional, and I know plenty of authors who take pride in writing cliffhangers. I'm going to explain why that's not the ideal way to write a story, in my own opinion. Here are 5 ways authors have left me with impactful endings that made me hate to finally put down their books. Specifically, what worked for me. Spoilers ahead for The Wheel of Time, The Dresden Files, and The Lord of the Rings, though I'll try and speak generally enough that it won't truly spoil them. On the other hand, I'm going to outright spoil the horror short story, The Midnight Meat Train. Number 1, bring it full circle. Subtle nods to humble beginnings go a long way to add meaning to the character's journey, and show how much they progress since we started along with them. The Wheel of Time ended in about the best possible way I could have expected, despite its 4 million plus words across the entire series. It went back to its roots and ended where it started. After all, the Wheel of Time turns, and ages come and pass. Normally, I don't like stories with obvious misleading prophecies meant to build unnecessary drama to a story's conclusion. At some point, I'm going to make a video where I rant about prophecies within stories, so you have that to look forward to. However, for The Wheel of Time, I'm willing to overlook that shortcoming because of how satisfying the send-off was for the hundreds of named characters, oftentimes drawing back to their original roots back in the first novel. Number 2, add a twist to make us rethink everything. This is exceptionally difficult to pull off successfully, especially without becoming like M. Night Shyamalan, where readers start looking for the twist. That being said, Jim Butcher performed this exceptionally well in one of his Dresden novels. There was an ending that was so drastic that it splits this long-running series into a moment of before and after. Everything after recontextualized moments before, and there were points where Dresden realized his own memories had been altered, which means that parts of the story the readers had been alongside with didn't actually happen as we had read them. Whether this was intentional or a later retcon, it still worked for me. Horror stories are often built around that surprise, where they can be expected to have one final jump scare or twisting of the knife to show that all the characters did was delay the oncoming disaster. In Clive Barker's short story The Midnight Meat Train, a man triumphantly defeated a serial killer, only to realize that he was holding back a much worse terror. Now the man needs to assume the role of the serial killer, lest the monsters he was feeding beneath the city roam free to consume every passenger of the train when they no longer receive their human tributes. Number 3, strive for catharsis. This comes in a variety of forms, whether it's 2 characters falling in love, or some horrible villain being burned alive with their final moments living in sheer agony. think about what readers want most and then give it to them. Or you could go the opposite route by snatching triumph away from the characters after raising them up, sending them into a spiral of ruin and decay. This dismal apocalyptic ending may set off some readers, but it's certainly unexpected, so that it has to be worth something, right? Number 4. This is my controversial opinion, but don't overuse cliffhangers. Cliffhangers tend to pull the rug out from readers and interrupt otherwise suspenseful moments. For me, they never build back up to that level of drama when the story continues. While many people enjoy reading cliffhangers, and there are certainly authors who take pride in writing them, I tend to think worse of those stories that end abruptly on a cliffhanger. One author whose works I've since stopped reading had a tendency to end the middle novel of the trilogies immediately following or sometimes during the climax, with no resolution whatsoever. The cliffhanger of a character being mortally wounded or of a minor revolt progressed without concluding any of the main elements raised within that middle novel, meaning the cliffhanger itself was meant to drive us to the finale, where I would have otherwise been bored of the novel. I love me some Empire Strikes Back, and that is the perfect cliffhanger. Yes, it does lead directly into the finale of the trilogy, but it also resolved the issues raised at the start of the movie, namely that the rebellion escaped the Empire's clutches on Hoth, and are now free to plan their counterattack. Along the way, Luke also got in his training montage to become a Jedi Knight. That's not to say that you can't have an epilogue where some giant purple man smiles to build up hype for a future story. I just think it works much better when you tell a complete story first, rather than cutting it off at what feels like the midpoint. Plot threads can carry over across novels and tie a series together with a sense of cohesion. This will reward attentive readers. However, when the cliffhanger interrupts the main plot so that it remains unresolved, the story is unfinished in my opinion. Everything doesn't need to be wrapped up with a pretty ribbon, but there should be some sense of resolution rather than a mindless march to an eventual finish line. Horror stories are the exception to my dislike of cliffhangers, though these tend to be that the killer is still alive or that the main characters remain in immense danger. And lastly, number 5, show the lessons learned. Were any of you disappointed by the ending to the movie version of The Lord of the Rings? Everyone I know was bored with the 4 endings we got after 15 plus hours of film, depending on which edition you're watching. I was disappointed for an entirely different reason. This is my hot take, but I would argue that the movie version skipped over the true ending to The Lord of the Rings. In the novels, Saruman survived the fall of Isengard and made his way to the Shire to enact his revenge against the hobbits. After traveling across Middle-earth, the 4 hobbits made their way back home to find it under siege by Saruman's army. There was no wizard or elf or dwarf or legendary human to save them. They needed to use every skill learned across their journey in order to save their friends, neighbors, and family. The versions of Merry, Pippin, Sam, and Frodo who left the Shire would never have been able to band together against such foes. In the Fellowship of the Ring, when faced with similar challenges, they ran or hid. Now, during the true ending to the novels, they proved worthy of peace and living out quiet lives by freeing their home from Saruman's rule. Those are 5 different methods to ending your novels on a high note, along with some examples. I hope I inspired you to pick up the novels I mentioned and appreciate their fulfilling endings. Or if you've already read them, then to reread them to experience it anew. I am Ben Pick, and thank you for joining me in Running to Write. What is your favorite book ending? Can you think of a story which was improved by having such a strong conclusion? Do you agree with my opinions, or is everything I said wrong? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this episode, then please give it a like and subscribe to the channel, or join the Running to Write community to share your thoughts. See you next time. Until then, build up those final moments of your story and make me cry.